Time for VUC. In our 11th year, with us on our journey this year, Simwood.com. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco. Greenfield Tech. Go to greenfield.tech and see how they can make your tech dreams both feasible and affordable. Our conference bridge is the best you'll ever find at zipdx.com. VUC.me is hosted on Bluehost. And our worldwide local rate dial-ins are provided by voxphone.com. All right, welcome to VUC. Do I have audio?
Yes, we hear you.
Uh-oh.
We hear you.
Am I on the right mic, though?
Yep.
Okay. Because I'm not seeing the thing in the Hangout. Anyway, going over to me, want to make sure that you realize that you can... What? There we go. You can call us and participate in this discussion. And from here on, we're going to make a big deal out of this. Call us. I'm not going to read the... Well, should I read the numbers?
Read the numbers.
213 in the United States, 213-454-0461 in the United Kingdom, 020-3051-6955. If you're in another city in the world, there are 40 other cities you can call us on. These are local rate dial-ins. Go to vuc.me/Voxbone. They're the ones that are providing these things. Further, as we move further into the new concept of the VUC, we want you to get on our Mastodon instance in order to post images, comments, and so on. It's a little richer than IRC and about 40 years more recent. Is that right? Hello, Usenet folks. It's masto.vuc.me. I'm a little afraid to show myself, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over directly to the camera so that you don't see the lag introduced by, there we go, by my other utility called CamTwist. And we have a fantastic panel with us today, starting with one of our guests who hasn't been here since October 2016, Mr. Dave Täht. Dave?
Good to see you all.
Yeah, the regular James Bodie, because he's in line.
Hello.
Jim Gettys is with us. Jim, thank you.
Hi there.
Kathleen King from the Free Switch world. Hey, Kathleen.
Hello.
Hi there. Where's Andy? Andy's not with us, but Michael, co-producer, Michael Graves. Hey, Michael.
Hello. Hello.
Okay, and we are going to be, I have to lean over. This is crazy. I have to lean way over to see the other screen. But what it has is a slide of something else we're going to be talking about. Oh, it doesn't work. Oh, right, because I have to go back to this. Here we go. This is
a bit of echo on you now.
But that wouldn't be coming from me. That would be coming from someone else.
Someone else. I think that was coming from James.
Could be James. Could be. All right. So you all know that a thing happened in the United States yesterday. And Andy Smith is with us. Hello, Andy. Let me give Andy a quick wave. Hey.
Hello.
All right. Welcome, Andy. Pi isn't 3.1416, whatever that is, 1718721. I'm confusing it with the
1659.
Thank you. I'm confusing it with the vertical scan rate or something, the horizontal, no, the color. What is it, 3.95? Somebody could cite the color frequency. Michael can do that.
3.59 megahertz, color subcarrier.
You all, 2 digits, that's all you got?
Yeah, for that, yeah. But 3.14159 is for...
That's close. All right, that's what I was looking for. You win. Dave and Jim are here to talk about, let's get rid of this face, which is not the greatest to look at. Not that mine is better, but that one has a symbolic value to it. We're going to have Jim and Dave are going to talk about Bufferbloat, what is the outlook for 2018? We are, in a few minutes, going to talk a little bit about what happened in the vote in net neutrality, how that affects the United States, how it affects the world. But before we do, I want to ask Dave, and then Dave, you pass it to Jim. Why do you guys care about Bufferbloat in the first place? What's the point? Why do you get up in the morning and spend half your life working on Bufferbloat? That is the new orientation.
For starters, I'm very glad that Kathleen is here because the kind of applications I care about are video conferencing and gaming and interactive internet, not the movie-driven internet. I wanted so much for this to be an enabling medium for people to communicate and so on. So that background where I can see when I'm talking to you all, when I'm making my point, I can see when someone smiles, I can see when they nod, I can see when they're like, you can see when they're, what? You know, so you just don't get that in textual mediums. And that's always what's driven me to try to improve these technologies. I got to admit that I've been at this now for 6 years, Jim for 7, that it's gotten a bit old. But if we keep banging this drum, you know, we have managed to help deliver products to the marketplace. Everyone that's on board with us has really great internet, and those that are crossing the chasm will have it one day. So I guess that's still my principal driver, is that I want the internet to be a rich interactive communications medium. Jim? Jim?
I guess my motivations are similar. I've dealt with the internet now since, depending how you count, around 1985, off and on, not all the time. I was working on video teleconferencing back in the 1990s before it was really practical, shall we say.
Yeah, little postage stamp, black and white images moving at one frame.
We were doing better than postage stamps, but then again, we had expensive JPEG compression hardware and stuff like this. And I got sort of dismayed when I found that my home connection with nominally at the time 20 megabits down and 2 megabits up was performing worse than the T1 line across the country we had for our experiments in that era. This was not good news, and I went sort of digging. That sort of, the history of that is buried in my blog, but it was sort of a dismaying realization that the network was not just a little bit broken, but badly broken for anything approximating real time. In fact, at that particular instant, my response was, under load at least, was like being a good part of the distance to the moon, which speed of light is fast, but it still takes a long time for light to get to the moon and back. I wasn't expecting that. You know, that made the research I was involved in, which again was teleconferencing at that instant, basically moot, because it said, if you really want this to work well, you have to fix the network first. So that's sort of been my motivation. And as Dave says, it has, in fact, after 7 or so years, gotten a bit old. Thankfully, I think we're over the hump long term, but that doesn't mean that there needs to be lots of energy from new people to continue pushing. You know, the rock is, I think, you know, beyond the top of the hill. You really want to push on it to make it accelerate down the hill, and that's where people can make a difference here.
We're having a little contest about who touched the internet first. Jim, bouncing on what you just said, I mentioned in IRC, I said that you were before me because the first time I was on the internet was in 1987. Then Maxim said 1986 for Usenet. Does anybody have any earlier contribution?
Well, hell, if you talk about UUCP, I was doing that in '83, so it wasn't the internet then.
Well, I mean, what is the internet? That was what Maxim asked, is what is the internet? And to me, the internet is the IP, right? IP internet address.
I'll argue the IP protocol is probably what we could, defining date.
Go ahead, Maxim.
Well, no, I agree, right? If it's TCP/IP, right, then obviously in Europe, I think the earliest I was on must have been '89 with the ISDN dial-up.
Yeah. Well, the internet flag.
But I would actually say you could argue that UUCP is like the predecessor, right?
You folks do know that you had in Europe, here in Europe, I don't know about Switzerland, Maxim can tell us, but in continental Europe, you had to go to the post office to get some kind of access until CompuServe. And CompuServe, Michael says, Michael, go ahead and voice that.
Well, in Canada, you had Minitel in France, right, which was very early.
Yeah, well, that had nothing to do with.
Okay.
Nothing to do with. That's my Ring doorbell. That isn't the Ring doorbell, but the real doorbell ring.
In Canada, we had a thing called Teledon, which was sort of early on in this stuff. But I would argue it was pre-internet, but it was similar to the French thing, the Minitel thing.
Yeah, I remember that we had CFAX and Teletext, but the other thing we had. I was doing in the late 70s was early X25. Not the internet, but it was packetized data networks. Advanced in its day, but soon overtaken.
Well, I guess what I would like to do is would like to shift this conversation to what will happen in the next 10 years in the post-Bufferbloat, post-network neutrality, post-China, Great Chinese Firewall era. And boy, the future is murky right now. I had such great hopes for the internet then. I thought it was going to be a great leveler, and I still think it is. And I thought it would help prevent wars because citizens would communicate directly with each other. And I thought that we would learn how to talk to each other. And instead, the last few years we had the Facebooks and the other sites like that creating dopamine addictions for everyone, as opposed to sitting there and reading a wonderful book or something like that we're worried about. There's a few issues I just don't feel like talking about on that side, I think. But, where will we be in 10 years? How will the internet change? Is a really good question to ask.
That's an excellent question, and I would throw that right back to you with Bufferbloat 2018 and what you folks are doing about it. By the way, Dave, you should probably mention the sites. I don't have them right under my thumb. Where do people go to learn about what you're doing? You've got at least one project going. Let's do that first.
I've got 5 projects, or have. They're running at a low level now. So the best place to pick up stuff about Bufferbloat is that the Wikipedia page is really good. We sort of have an overriding thing is that although Jim coined the word, we're not really talking about Bufferbloat per se anymore. We're talking about reducing latencies more than anything else. And that's much broader and involves a larger variety of techniques. The first project that we did was called Sarawort, which was an attempt to make home routers better. We identified a string of really major problems with home routers, notably security and IPv6 support in Bufferbloat. And we tackled that, and we delivered it, and we shipped that into open source in the Linux kernel. And I argue that was the greatest success story that we had by creating a example concept. And I will ever flagellate poor Jim there for making me do it, because I didn't want to do it. And I do appreciate that we did that together, Jim.
Well, you understand that was because I was tired of people in the IETF saying that these boxes couldn't do that, and therefore one couldn't think about defining things that might actually be useful.
So what we did in part was take away the
stupidity. Literally less work, at least from my point of view. have Dave go off and demonstrate this. than to argue about this for years on mailing lists.
I completely agree with you now that the right thing was to do was to provide a proof of concept that this stuff was doable. And in part, this is one of my responses to the whole network neutrality debate. We wanted to push the control of how the internet works to your home, to you, so you could make the decision as to how you dealt with your network. And we not only did that, but we also found ways of making the crappy head-end makers like the CMTSs and the DSLAMs. We also found ways of working around those problems. So with that project, we put the control back in the hands of the users, the ones that are smart enough to be able to reflash their own firmware. And from that starting point, it ended up in mainline Linux and a bunch of commercial products and so on. And we don't get those horrible email threads. Then we tackled Wi-Fi, and we had that took 6 years.
Wi-Fi was hard.
That's what burned me out, essentially. But we ended up basically doing our usual number. We made Wi-Fi perform with about an order of magnitude less latency. It carries voice and video well on the code that we again put out there. Published a breakthrough paper. It's got a bunch of sites, and again, the code's out there. It's being delivered in multiple products, and again, it took 6 years, or 5 years, I should say, and the benefits everybody are starting to enjoy now. You'll see there's several concepts in that. One of them is called airtime fairness. I'm seeing that in almost every new product shipped today, so I'm happy with that. Anyway, the current project has been Cake. And there's, how would you describe Cake, Jim? Since you've been on the outside. I can do it, but I'd just love to know what your perception of Cake is.
Well, I guess so we've understood in principle what to do now for quite a while with things like FQCoddle, but setting this up and configuring this in a useful way was, shall we say, entertainingly difficult. And Cake tries to let you have your cake and eat it too. It puts most of the things that people seem to have had some success with at improving latency together into one Q discipline for Linux, so that mere mortals might be able to configure this without dealing with an overly complex system. Now so in some sense is pushing all the complexity into one place. It's baking a cake, right, to do what's needed. Because it goes beyond just as Dave was saying, it goes beyond dealing with Bufferbloat to a whole lot of stuff around queuing, again, the like to reduce latency, and those things tend to be hard to do in isolation. They're easier to try to do together. Is that a fair summary?
That's reasonable, but I will extrapolate unless someone wants to ask a question a little bit. No, let me extrapolate. It was not cake to do. And
it certainly was not a cakewalk.
It's been it ended up being a place where we stuck all the ideas that hadn't quite worked out, and we kept doing that, and evaluating the ideas were difficult. But it has explicit improvements for video conferencing. It's got explicit simplicity. The commit message when we submitted it to the Linux kernel last week was something that is so simple that even an ISP could configure it. And I'm hoping that would be the case. It is our final thing to throw over the transom. So video conferencing, better FQCoddling, better shaping, better this, better that, and in one fiercely complex piece of code that has a very simple API. And I'm hoping that will, in the end, be deployable at a bigger scale. So, and yeah, I'm hoping that we finish that project this coming few months, and then after that is sort of why this is called Bufferbloat 2018. I don't know how there's structural problems, like how do I get an ISP to actually deliver a box that will do that? You know, Randy over there was one of the first recipients of the Bufferbloat project's work. The free ISP adopted the FQCODO algorithm 3 months after we published it in 2012.
Why did they do that is what I'm trying to figure out. And how do we get more ISPs to be interested? Because I can't quite figure out what was their interest in doing that. It's just because it was there?
Well, in part, they're in a competitive market, and in part, they're smart, and in part, they build their own boxes. I'm really impressed with it as they have that level of control over their supply chain. Other places don't have control over their supply chain. So that with that early writing on that early success, I had figured that, oh, we'd be done now. We'd be done several years ago, and instead things started to stall out. I wanted to, you know, for example, we pursued, because the Linux is GPL and algorithms are somewhat patentable, we pursued a strategy of making sure that these algorithms went out in the public domain. We worked really hard to unpatent things, to make absolutely sure no one could patent anything behind our backs. And we made sure that the code would be not only available under the GPL, but the BSD licenses. And we then pursued the standardization effort in the IETF after shouting down all the people that said, oh, you can't do this, with actually deploying it really widely. And now that's deployed really widely. The 2 RFCs that are this close to being published 6 years later, RFC 8289 and RFC 8290 should be published pretty soon, which describe how this stuff should work and why it's there.
We're literally in the matter of days before publication. The last edits are going in, the RFC numbers have been assigned, and all that sort of stuff.
So we hopefully will be able to point large manufacturers or RFC, you know, big buyers like governments, and say, by the way, is this thing RFC 8290 compliant? And that could be a checkbox item. So that's sort of one answer to your question, Randy. But,
this is a very, very, in my opinion, very tough. Is my mic on? Yes, it is. Very tough nut to crack, because first of all, okay, so where I am right now, I have a box that was provided by Orange, who I have hated over the years. My hatred for Orange, I won't even go into that. And yet they are now my ISP. Why? Because they have fiber, and the fiber works very well. But the point is that I have no control. I have a box here. I suppose if I really wanted to get into it, I could put it in bridge mode, right? Wouldn't that be the way to do it? Whoever your ISP is, you can probably put your box into bridge mode and use your own router, I'm assuming. Yeah. So you're basically, I mean, but already to translate that into for the average person it's almost, it's insurmountable already, you know?
Right.
I mean,
my mother will not have her router in bridge mode. My mother, unless I go set something up for her, my mother will not do that. And I look even at my neighbor next door, who is an engineer working in the petrochemical industry. You know, he's completely reliant on AT&T for his in-home IP. It boggles the mind that people are so disinterested in their in-home connectivity, and yet
they're willing to complain about it, and they're willing to watch.
I don't necessarily think that they're disinterested, but if you look at the experience that I've had in the United States, which is only through friends who live there, and you know, you go to somebody's house and they go, well, my internet doesn't work anymore, so they call Comcast or Cox Cable or whoever it is, and the rigmarole that accompanies these calls is beyond. We don't even want to get, we could talk for 5 hours about this stuff, but the main point is it's very opaque. I'm tempted to ask Kathleen if she's had any problems with her own internet connectivity at home, and whether there's anybody there to solve these problems.
Well, I'm in a bit of a lucky situation because technically we have business class Comcast, so it's much, much better than residential. But when I did have residential issues, I would call my brother occasionally and be like, hey, how do I talk to the Comcast people? Because this is impossible. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So,
But you have not gone to the extent of actually slamming a open work router in front of your Comcast connection and made it better that way.
actually, I did. I don't remember the exact setup I had, but I did end up sort of modifying what they had initially given me because it was garbage. It wasn't working. So I can't imagine the average user would do that. I had guided help. So I can't picture any of my friends or anything being able to do that without extensive communication.
I got to tell you, I am something of a Johnny Appleseed with respect to preaching the values of PFSense and small wall and DTWRT and all of these things. And if you've got a router that that's a commercial product that can run DTWRT, you should and let me help you, right?
No, I do. My hope is that we would have a sufficient army of people that would help two people who would then help two people who would then help two people. And to some extent, I really think that's been happening silently because we've put the information out there. So I'm hoping that, Kathleen, you can try this stuff. I also wanted to touch upon the fact that, we are seeing gigabit fiber, and we are seeing higher speeds. So the higher the speeds go, the less these problems really can bother you. And in part, I like to think that we've headed off a disaster.
Dave, you're missing that.
Go ahead.
That better last mile means that you got the problem back into Wi-Fi. Okay.
Yes, I know.
I'm missing Wi-Fi into Wi-Fi is going to be a problem, right?
I fixed that.
Yes, I know.
Uses our code.
You and Toby fixed that. Thank you. And we are in fact benefiting from that this instant through my roof antenna. However, a piece of this is things like competition. I will make a plug for a company that I have no relationship with whatsoever. But I have thought highly enough to both give it to a tech writer at the company I'm consulting for and to my brother both, which is a company named EvenRoute, and they've taken the current lead OpenWrt bits and shipped a version of that that's up to date and automatically deals with the last mile Bufferbloat, and as of very recently has the new Wi-Fi code. So that is something which I actually think you can potentially give to your grandmother or your mother, in a rational way, without the level of hand-holding that I've seen required for if you roll your own with by downloading your favorite lead OpenWrt bits and installing them. So I'm very happy to see that kind of product appear. If you go look at the reviews on, say, the Amazon website and elsewhere, they're extremely favorable, and that ultimately competition helps, right? And I think things like that are being noticed, and to finally have a product like that you can tell people, well, try this, is a milestone as far as I'm concerned.
I think the biggest problem. Where are we getting? I don't know.
Jim.
Everybody mute. Okay, so the biggest problem, you've got the problem of the last mile, but you also have the problem of the person who's at the last mile. And like I say, I think that the most difficult thing in all of this stuff is that, look, as a lifelong geek, I have burned ROMs and things like that, but it's not a thing that I really want to do, okay? So, I have had Linksys routers that you can put yada, yada, open source, blah, blah, blah on. But how much time do you want to spend on this? You know, we could actually talk for quite a long time about how much time we spend on updating our Samsung Watch software, with regard to the Android software, with regard to Apple, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's nothing left of life. And I would like to move on, unless there's things that we have not covered with Bufferbloat 2018, to some other things, including the net neutrality thing, but also just the human aspect of what we are. Oh, Michael just got Android 8.1 on his Pixel today. I just got 8 on the OnePlus One 3T. So I guess it's 8.0 maybe. Anyway, we spend so much time. I think Dave would be sensible to this argument that we spend way too much time on this stuff. I'm not talking about Bufferbloat. I'm talking about screwing around with phones and gadgets. Dave, you're out there. You want to be on a boat with no clothes on, and yet, you know what I'm saying? I mean, this is nuts. It really is. We are spinning off into some wacky, time-wasting. I don't have that many hours left in my life. They're probably numbering in the thousands. So how many times do I want to restart my watch and reboot the phone and get the software, you know? So anyway, that's...
You know what, Randy, you're absolutely right. Yeah, my view on this is that every single system that we have, communication system, network, computer, they're all suboptimal. They all have faults and problems with them. But as long as they're good enough, then you can move to the next stage. And it's the higher level protocols that I think are the most interesting. As long as what's going on down at the transport layers is good enough, then you can probably get by with it, can't you? But this is where, Dave, you say, but I'm a purist. It must be efficient. It must be good.
No. Well, that level of OCD is kind of required in order to, for example, make an airplane fly hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of times without crashing. You know, we're helping hold the structure of society up. Give you an example. What if we were horribly dependent upon video conferencing in general, and yet we still always had to negotiate for 3 minutes, rebooting, plugging stuff in, rewiring stuff.
Yeah, but you know what? This is my point. This is my point, because I do live and die by video conferencing on a daily basis. Andy and I talk every single day, multiple times, video conferencing.
Look, can we get Andy to confirm that?
Yeah, and so, for example, the other day, Andy had a bit of a mishap and ended up in Southampton General Hospital, plugged into the wall with all his monitors. But we were still video conferencing, weren't we, Andy?
We were indeed. It was quite bizarre, actually.
Well, the example I was going to be is that, you know, the video conferencing system fails, the internet fails for some reason. And I was actually going to try to shift us away from home routers and the algorithms in a second, but you know, Trump and Putin need to have a call, and the damn call's not working. The missiles are in the air. So that level of OCD thing, that drive towards perspection, and to make sure it just works for everybody, is sort of what we have to do. You need to get to the 99.99999th percentile in order to deliver this stuff. An amusing thing, somewhat amusing thing happened. This will end up being a good lead into that. I was on a very important video conference call with some people in South Africa, Shuttleworth Foundation, and the internet went down. It basically, there was this hour-and-a-half outage where level 3's connectivity with Comcast got completely destroyed, and we saw the effects of Bufferbloat on what happened, and we saw that connectivity just began to fail for everybody. And an earthquake, a major natural disaster, a war. I think that the overall infrastructure of the internet is a lot less robust than it should be. And I would like us to make sure that it will survive another Fukushima event off the coast of California, for example. So I wish we had, keying into the whole net neutrality debate, shifting to that, you know, that debate, it was sort of like How many people have heard or read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Everybody.
And I figured as much as a universal communications medium. Well, there's a scene in there where they end up on planet Earth with a whole bunch of people from sales and marketing back millions of years ago. And they have invented the wheel, but they couldn't deploy it because they couldn't decide what color it would be. And we sort of have a similar problem with the whole FCC network neutrality debate over should this be managed over Title II? Should it have a new set of rules? Should we do this? Should we do that? We have content. We're talking about a really flawed analogy of fast lanes and slow lanes. It's just I don't want to go into that just now. When we should be talking about the impact of botnets and worrying about security issues and why the Equifax's hacks of the world keep happening, and who should be responsible for those. So although all these resources are just summoned on both sides of a simple debate, the actual conversation about the real problems doesn't seem to be happening. And I wish I could motivate FCC and the FTC and the ISPs and the EFFs to come together and agree that, by the way, we have these other 20 things that somebody needs to step up and take responsibility for.
Unfortunately, and here is a little montage of the day after hangover time for the FCC debate. The FCC, James, you are an amateur radio operator, as am I. The FC in the United States, the FCC, I don't know who did it in Britain, but the FCC was in charge of what went over the airwaves. That's why you couldn't say FUCK. That's why there were the 7 words, whatever they were, that George Carlin mentioned. But
George Carlin is so out nowadays that you would just totally invade someone's. It would be microaggression.
Well, we'll get into that in a subsequent thing. Point is, anyway, this is Pi, who isn't 3.141816, whatever that is. But let's get into this a little bit, and I'm very interested in everyone's opinion of it. But we have to stay in the Americans, because this is right now America, and then we'll get into everybody else because it probably will reflect upon the rest. First of all, since I'm here talking, let me give my take, which is that I don't think the FCC really should have anything to do with the internet at all. And I'm going to throw that over to Michael now and get him his take on it.
I am bifurcated of mind on this. I have 2 points of view, and I'm not sure that either of them are any more valid than the other. However, I would like to ask the assembled IP cognoscenti here, if you're familiar with Martin Gettys and his most current work in Just Right Networks and this sort of thing. And my sense on the network neutrality stuff is only that it gets worse before it gets better, but that it can get better. And I just wonder if we're going into that lull where we find out that it's going to get a little bumpy between now and then.
Competition.
Poll the room. I have an opinion, but I'd love some people to throw in questions on that latter point in particular.
Let's get Kathleen's impression of net neutrality. What do you know, and what do you have to say?
Well, it's an interesting idea. I think at this point we are moving towards the internet and access to the internet almost being a basic human right. You've got companies and charities launching satellites so that people in very remote parts of the world can access it. And I don't know about anybody else, but I cannot do anything anymore without the internet. Like even to apply for jobs or something, you have to do it all online. Or it's very rare to find a place that'll take a just strictly paper resume. So I think it's definitely something we need to figure out, and we need to do it well. And I think we're going to have a bit of a time figuring out exactly how to make it fair, because I understand that the people supplying it do need to be able to cover their costs and things like that. But, you know, at this point, everyone needs to be able to access it. So how do we do that in a way that makes sense? So that's my opinion, I guess.
Jim?
I think this is a point at which a little bit of history that's not understood should be surfaced. The whole network neutrality debates effectively were sparked by Comcast's actions around BitTorrent, where whether they intended to or not is a different discussion. I don't know what reality is there for sure. That they had the effect of blocking a particular application. Now, if you look at why did they do that, it turns out that BitTorrent was the first time really major application that would just suck bandwidth in the upstream direction happened to deploy into the internet. And particularly on the low-end connections, it would make the customers' cable connections effectively unusable for anything. By the time I ran into Bufferbloat, I had a lot more bandwidth and would have been seeing something that was only 1/5 to 1/10 as bad as what was happening to a lot of Comcast customers at that date, if they happened to use BitTorrent. And they misdiagnosed what happened. And they implemented the infamous sandvine system for throttling or killing it. And that's where the difference of opinion is, but I know that they actually killed it in my house because I tested whether I could run BitTorrent at one point. Whether they intended to kill it is a different discussion. So the unfortunate thing that the senior management of those companies took away is something which is actually somewhat true, but not in the sense that they understood it. The takeaway was a particular application could make the network effectively unusable for customers. And in fact, I believe that an ISP under those circumstances needs to take action, or needs to be able to take action. The flaw in what Comcast did was they did it without telling anybody. That helped delay the diagnosis, since they had misdiagnosed what the problem was, which was emphatically Bufferbloat. We didn't even have a word for it then.
And establish the precedent.
And that's what the senior management has, I think, still has a lot of feeling that a particular application could screw them, or screw the network in general. And that's indeed possibly true. Now, the fundamental issue of why did BitTorrent do things in was the fact that the network hardware was already badly broken. I go over some of this in my blog, where I describe this history if you want more detail. But that's what triggered this whole debate. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of rent seeking by many of the ISPs going on. I'll also notice that Comcast, who got burned the most by this, has been by far the most helpful to Dave and myself on actually doing something about this. So there's not, this is, they would just as soon see Bufferbloat get fixed as much as the next guy. Now, they don't have full control over their supply chain. So as was noted earlier, some people are able to take advantage of the work that's been done almost immediately, and others who are dependent upon that supply chain are not. And Comcast, unfortunately, is mostly of the not category. But you need to understand where people are coming from in this whole debate. This was an existential threat to Comcast and other ISPs. They, in many ways, had to take action, doing it secretly, such that literally diagnosing the fact that there was way too much buffering in these devices was delayed by literally years, was the thing that I have to say they did really badly. But that's where this whole thing started. And it still shapes a lot of people's feelings about from that side of things of, oh, I need to be able to control the applications that run, because they might actually make the network unusable. And some of them just want to make tons of money. There are ISPs which would like to slice and dice everybody the way the cable system has been run, so that they can maximize the number of dollars they can get out of you. The motivations are complex here, and the different people have, different organizations have different intents.
It sometimes feels like a war where nobody remembers why it started, but it goes on with a blood feud for years upon years. And again, to me, the issues are, I worry it's not TART that's the problem at the moment. It's compromised IoT devices. And that would have been a great debate to have had during this last round of network neutrality debates.
I mean, in some ways, we're fighting some of the last war, which is, the technology for fixing the current set of issues caused by Bufferbloat. Yeah, I mean, we sort of know how to do this now, and as I said, I think we're beyond the top of pushing the rock up the hill, and it will come down. Maybe not as fast as we all would like on the other side. I don't think that that's necessarily the biggest problem in the long term. I think exactly the point of view expressed earlier of how do we make a system which takes care of itself so that it's secure all the time and gets updated appropriately. And the reason why I pointed people at the even route router is it does that sort of thing for you, and it manages the head-end connection for you, so you don't have to turn knobs and stuff like that. What you want is something that actually plugs in and handles the problem itself, which is not installing firmware on, downloading firmware from Lead OpenWrt or anywhere else and installing it on the hardware. That's for geeks. That doesn't help your mother. It doesn't help your ISP. It's not sustainable at scale.
So the question is really then, should an FTC or an FCC find some way of mandating that these sort of strategies end up in the default product? And I don't know how to do that. And do we want the government?
I think there's a fundamental issue here, as I've thought about this for many years now, that without liability, the current ecosystem will not change. And I think for the life of devices, this is a pretty radical position. For the reasonable lifetime of a device, whether it's anywhere from a chip to a integrated box that you put in your house somewhere and forget about, that for that expected lifetime at least, there comes an obligation of the person selling it that one way or the other, that device is not going to become internet toxic waste and never see updates and never get better, and whatever design flaw it had when it was installed will remain forever. And that takes a revolution in how we view the long-term support of devices and software. And that's going to be a really hard battle.
I think that it's worth saying here that in the context of people who have light bulbs that are controlled over the internet and their stoves and IoT in general, we are absolutely going nuts on this stuff. And there doesn't seem to be any good framework for updates, for, I mean, it's beyond me. The only solution I have to offer, and I can give you a good solution right now. They used to say, just unplug it. Well, don't have a smart home. Don't have a smart TV. Smart TV, let's just talk about the tiny aspect.
You can't say that.
Wait a minute. Just let me finish my sentence and then you can go. James, I'm calling on you next, James. I have no desire to have a smart TV. I want my TV to do what I want it to do. I don't want it to be on the internet. I will go on the internet. I'm capable. I have the time. I have the desire to go find what I want on the internet. I don't want my TV talking to the internet. Why? Because, the latest internet scandal, whatever that's called, is that Netflix knows who binges on what. Well, what do I care? I'm on Netflix. I don't necessarily use Netflix to look at. We're getting lots of noises here. I don't necessarily watch everything on Netflix that I want to watch on Netflix. Well, that's complicated. I won't get into that. But the point is, James, that yes, I don't want a smart home. I don't want my air conditioning or my heaters controlled on the internet. I didn't when it was relays and solenoids, and I don't now. I don't want light bulbs controlled on the internet. I don't want thermostats transmitting data on the internet. You may do so. You're welcome to do it, but I don't. James.
Bah humbug. Yeah, you just sound like these Edwardian people who said these motor cars are really dangerous and they can knock people down, and so you've got to have a man walking in front with a red flag. You know, all these things are dangerous, and
cars are dangerous.
Yeah, and alcohol's dangerous, wine's dangerous, everything's dangerous. But as long as you recognize that there's a big upside with the downside, and you can handle that, and you can learn to drive your car so that you don't run people over every day, then it's really, really useful.
You're not going to drive your car because the car is going to drive you, and I'm waiting for
that. But you know what?
Car?
I don't want a car. I want my own lithium sulfur powered helicopter thing to fly me. Who wants to drive along roads? That's so last century.
Absolutely.
I want to fly.
Absolutely.
And you know, I'm pushing forward all the time. Give me all this good stuff. Give me connected everything. It gives me a kick when I go into my kitchen and say, Alexa, start Christmas. And the Christmas tree comes on. The carols from King's College, Cambridge come on. And, you know, and it's just beautiful. I love it.
All right, let's
gentlemen.
Michael,
but then again, yeah, my last final bit is there are always people who get it wrong. So idiots who go out and buy a Ring doorbell and expect it to work.
Oh my God! Oh, you idiot! All right, Michael, I'm sensitive to the argument. Michael is saying let the guest speak, and he's quite correct. So let's get
Dave's
back.
Our job is not to amuse Dave. Our job is for Dave to educate and inform us. So let's get back to that.
I like that we have a panel, and I just saw Kathleen cracking up as well. You know, I when I was a kid, you know, this is
Alexa,
a box,
turn on the office lights.
Okay, this is a quad-core gigabit of RAM box. That's this here. It eats a watt. So we're ending up in a future where absolutely everything will have something in it.
Mine's smaller than yours. Mine's smaller than yours, Dave.
This is not.
But mine is smaller than yours, James.
This is not the usual competition normal men have. So I think it is inevitable we will have a string of unupdatable, semi-connected devices kind of living in the air. Everywhere. It's going to be almost impossible to be a Luddite because you're just going to have, it's just going to creep in on something.
How do you update your light bulbs?
Well, I should turn out that I'm leaning more and more towards your, I mean, I've been working on making IoT possible since the early 90s, basically. And I had envisioned a much brighter, shinier, science fiction-y future where, you know, I mean, take the Alexa phenomenon. I don't like that there's only one Alexa and there's only one Siri. There's three, okay, and there's Google, right? So there's only 3 voices out there you can talk to. You know, I had thought this would be mine. This would be Jeeves or Slave or, you know, Jeremiah. You would have your own control over that. So it's kind of a control issue. I mean, for example, I know way too much about car automation. And it terrifies me. I decided I wasn't going to buy a modern car because there's 260 plus processors. So
don't buy a Jeep. Certainly don't buy a Jeep. But there are other cars available that are a darn sight more secure. So
who is James Bodie?
Sorry.
According to Wikipedia, James Body was a rugby union international who represented England from 1872 to 1873.
Yeah, don't be fooled by my youthful.
My case.
My
I
youthful
rest my
boyish.
case.
Well, it's because
Let me
sorry,
jump
Jim.
in here for a second.
Go ahead.
This kind of thing has happened before. When electricity was first invented, lots of houses burned down. Lots of people died. There were some actual regulations required. There were some standards required. At the moment, we have precious few of those, and particularly from the point of view of how, because we haven't had to think about it in the past, how to deal with the situation where these things have lifetimes that are long relative to the engineering group that develops them, and or even of many or most companies. If I have a internet controlled furnace, what am I going to do in 20 years? The lifetime of that hardware is probably 20, 30, 40 years. I don't want to throw it out. The software in these devices may need updates. As I said, if we do nothing, we have toxic waste. We have a problem here that society has not ever faced. It will, and many of the solutions are non-technical in nature. They are things, unfortunately, like liability and regulation. How to do that well and do that with a light touch is a very entertainingly difficult problem.
You're right, Jim, it is. But the argument that because we've never been there before means that we shouldn't do it is just a false one. So I'm all for pushing the boundary and going for it.
I said we have to start thinking now deeply about this problem of long-lived devices, or what we're going to be ending up surrounded by devices that are toxic waste and or dangerous to us.
Yes. Well, you're right.
But houses will burn down around us.
But ultimately, it will become very difficult for companies who manufacture these things to actually sell devices that don't have an upgradable long life, because people will learn. People will be burned by buying things that don't upgrade. But after a couple of iterations of that and finding out that they just bought a pile of Chinese rubbish that they can't do anything with, then people will learn.
Here's the rub with this. The technology marches onwards. The previous alternatives may not even be available to us anymore. For example, there was a wonderful plenary session at the IETF about 4 or 5 years ago to try to make people wake up that the conventional telephone system is going away. Nobody designs copper equipment anymore. Having an alternative for communications to the internet, which we've always had for the life of the internet, is rapidly going away. So going from, we're in this transition from a state where if something goes wrong, I can still work with somebody else somehow to get it fixed, to if the internet stops working, now what, is rapidly coming upon us. And so right now we are not thinking through this whole problem.
Well, perhaps many people aren't, but many other people, like Andy and I, we never go anywhere without multiple ways of communicating. I always have about half a dozen phones and other devices in my pocket. Andy, when he went to Southampton Hospital and ended up being incarcerated there, had 2 phones in his pocket. And they proved
the cell phone network stops working. What do we do? What do we do if the entire internet stops working?
Well, we're back to HF radio, aren't we? A meteor scatter.
Well, yeah, right. And a lot of people die. So we have to think about this in a little bit more depth. Yeah, you know, I'm old enough, and I think Dave may have been there as well, to have the vivid memory of being at a meeting one day when effectively the internet stopped working. it has
Morris worm,
and-
Morris worm.
well, the Morris worm, but also I had similar problems during the development of the X window system, where for a period of about 6 or 9 months, due to network congestion, we were unable to exchange data between California and MIT effectively. So I have seen the network stop working. And unfortunately, Dave and I know that while it seems wonderful to people who've never experienced such a global scale thing, because we've dodged the bullet so far in the recent history of the internet. We don't believe that it's, we believe that this network is held together by a lot more spit and baling wire than most people understand.
Yeah, well, that might be true, but the whole network was designed to survive nuclear war, wasn't it?
No, it was not. That is a complete myth.
Well, come on, let's talk about that then.
Absolute myth. If you go talk to people like Vince Cerf, you will get a very different story. It was designed so that computers could be shared between. So that people at ARPA didn't have to buy one computer per institution necessarily.
Yeah, but then the way that ARPA got their research funding was to sell it to the military and say, hey, we've got this really robust network that can absorb damage.
Yeah,
and
not
give us a whole load of money. We'll make it better.
That I've heard propagated for years. It is so far from reality.
But you have to admit that the internet is remarkably resilient, isn't it?
Well, and as we saw earlier this week, somehow a lot of our packets for a little bit went to Russia. I'm not sure that was a great idea. It is that fragile, which are, this system we are now putting life dependence on, was designed in an era before having a secure network mattered. It now matters. And an example that you can do a BGP hijack is about as...
Well, you know what? I don't know what it's like in the States, but certainly over here in the UK, the rule is if you've got a really mission-critical system, you do not, under any circumstances, connect it to the internet. You keep it standalone.
But there's not going to be any alternative. That's the problem. It used to be
I don't subscribe to that either, Jim. There are always alternatives.
But that's what Henning Schultzreen was pointing out to people in the ITF. That situation, which is a luxury we've had for a very long time, is rapidly going into the past. So, for example, leased frame relay circuits that you have long since been migrated over to running on top of the internet. Okay, so that thing that looks like a leased circuit to you actually isn't. So I'm much less confident than you have about the resilience of our systems. Does that mean we're going to not use IoT? It's happening. I like my Nest thermostats. I'm also willing to have them in my house because I actually see upgrades of that software on an ongoing basis. When I stop seeing those upgrades, I'm going to be looking for new ones.
Yeah, well,
okay?
That's great as long as you don't go for a Ring doorbell, Jim. Don't go.
I'm not going to put a doorbell in right now because I don't know of anybody.
There's some really good ones, but Ring is probably not
Ring sucks. Ring sucks. It's a piece of trash. Dave, you need to unmute.
We have a generational problem, in that the people that know how all this works are getting old, and the next generation is grown very dependent on things that they don't necessarily understand, and the generation after that will also be completely divorced from any knowledge about how it really works.
Yeah, but
all the AI will take care of it all, and our robot overlords will be handling it. So don't worry.
I have faith in people like Kathleen and people of that ilk who will come and take over, and they will take everything to a higher plane. So the fact that we're all getting old and kind of dying off and having the odd heart attack here and there is by the by. We've got to have faith in the next generation. They will overcome.
All right. Speaking of which, we have two guests here. And I wanted to ask specifically, Dave, And Dave, you want to say something first? Fine, but I have something to ask you and Jim after. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Kathleen, do you feel your generation is ready to take over from us?
Oh, no, but hopefully we'll get there.
I happen to be deeply pessimistic.
Well, Kathleen is an exception because she's surrounded by people who know what they're doing, right, Kathleen?
Yes.
You're connected in a way that the average person. No, Kathleen is not an average person, so she's connected in ways that the average person is not. I wanted to ask you, Dave, and Jim for your take on whether it's worth getting up in the morning every day and what motivates you to do that. Now, Dave, you mentioned a boat and you have a photo to show us maybe, but both of you, I'm just curious, in this fight that we know that you've been leading for years, first of all, is it going to go on much longer? And second of all, what are you getting up for in the morning? Dave first, I guess, since he looks like he's nodding and understand.
No, let Jim take it.
Yeah,
actually.
let Jim go first. Okay. Jim.
Well, you know, I guess part of the problem of understanding things deeply is what Dave said. I am pessimistic in certain regards, particularly at the moment. I have 2 children. I would like them to have a better world. I don't want it to burn down around around them. So, you know, I'd like the world to be a better place by the time I leave it, right? In many ways, the internet has been a truly wonderful thing. It has enabled us to do things that we've not been able to do in the past, but this is a two-edged sword where there are good sides and there are bad sides. Not all problems in this world have technological solutions, and we are in the midst of problems here that are of how do we as a society choose to apply this technology, and those decisions are made by people who do not necessarily understand the technology and what the options may be. So the best we can do is attempt to educate people. I mean, that's part of what sessions like this are about where we see issues, and hope that we can help push things in better directions.
So that was a very difficult question for me, Randy, because for off and on for the last year or two, I've had a great difficulty getting up in the morning. When I first met Jim, he had mirrored a problem that I'd had for a while and understood it well, and we joined forces, and I had a cause. Having a cause, fixing the internet, getting up in the morning, because the internet had a hugely developmental portion of my life. I was a lonely geek in New Jersey, and I didn't meet anybody like me, and I didn't have my own tribe. These are things that everybody takes for granted now, that you have hundreds of friends throughout the world. But, I went to a place where is near Atlantic City, New Jersey, and which is a casino resort, and all of my friends grew up to become dealers of some sort or another. So the internet created a huge opportunity for people to branch out and become who they could be. And so that was my motivation for many of these past years. The dedication was to get up in the morning and go make sure the internet would still work. And we've done that, but it's still these long-term issues, just Internet 2028. The glass is not very clear. That's what will happen, and I'm tired. I wanted to, I just did buy a boat yesterday. I'm very happy about that. I've never owned a boat. And this boat has got no electric. It's got all manual this and manual that. It doesn't have any of these things on it. There's no Bluetooth. So I'm going in retro mode to get away from this stuff. And literally, if I can sail away from it now and not have it be tracked on Google, I can actually finally drop off completely offline. So
you don't want to do that completely. Make sure you take an HF radio with you, just in case your mast breaks and you just need a little bit of assistance.
But I know that I can actually physically turn that off. There was an old case years ago. The guy was named Hans Rieser. Ever hear of that one? He was ultimately convicted of murder. But he had a habit of pulling the batteries out of these things when he was wandering around Russia because he was concerned about being tracked. All of our citizens are now being regularly tracked. You're tracked 6 different ways because you carry 6 phones.
Actually, I might be one of the person who does the tracking. We're actually talking about now deploying our own private LTE network here in the English countryside. And one of the prime motivators is to allow us to track the velocity of vehicles going through the villages. And so we can tell people to slow down. Bizarre, isn't it?
And find them. Yeah.
Well, no, we won't find them. We don't need to get that heavy. We just need to tell them to slow down in varying ways that to just makes them think. I'm not into whacking people with a big stick. I just want them to think.
Somebody will be.
Yeah, I know. I've worked on that side as well. And yeah, precision guided 1,000-pound bombs flying through windows and things like that. And but it's not the way to do business, really. It's not the way to win. That's a loser way.
I think that's a perfect moment to say thank you to our guests, Dave Täht. Hey, Dave, thank you so much for doing this. Pleasure to see you. And I hope
I've really missed you guys. I've really missed seeing you guys.
You have to be a regular. We're going to do a whole new thing, and I'll explain it to you at some other point. Jim Gettys, thank you so much for joining us. You are way too rare as a guest. Both of you guys are.
Yes, Jim, I looked you up on Wikipedia, and you are a legend.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, even more legendary than your rugby stuff. Yeah, and thank you also, Jim.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to Kathleen. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, James. We are going to seal off this version of the VUC and go on to the mature audiences only version. But I'm kind of hungry, so I don't know if that's going to last very long. But anyway, you heard it here first. This is the closure. Good night.